Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the National Skills Coalition webinar, Advocating for Adult Education When Learners Take the Lead. Before we get started, we want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. Following the webinar, you will receive an email that includes the recording as well as the slides. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, and if you have a question or comment for our panelists, you can feel free to type it into the question box at any time. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. If you're having any trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, let us know in the question box and we'll try to resolve any issues you might be having. So we're going to go ahead and get started now. So today's webinar is going to cover a few major topic areas. The first is just a quick refresher on why advocacy is important. My guess is if you're joining today's webinar, you already know why it's important, but we just wanted to refresh everyone's memories and attention with the National Skills Coalition approach to advocacy and how we work on this, why we think it's so important. We're also going to share a few resources that National Skills Coalition and our partners in the adult education field have to share, and then we'll turn to our guest panelists. So just to get us oriented, National Skills Coalition is a national policy advocacy coalition of more than 22,000 network members across the country who include labor unions, employers, chambers of commerce, workforce boards, adult educators, immigrant integration and immigrant advocates, and a whole range of other stakeholders and partners who support adult education and workforce issues. And we work at the state and at the federal level to advance effective policies that help adult learners. Many of you know and are funded by sources such as the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Title II, also known as AFLA, or the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. And we work at the state level on policies such as integrated education and training, stackable credentials, and other policies that can support adult learners as they move from entry-level positions into middle skill positions. Of course, the focus of National Skills Coalition, and I will ask for folks to mute themselves during the webinar here. If you're not speaking, please make sure that you're muted so that we don't have background noise. The focus of National Skills Coalition is middle skill jobs, jobs that require more than a high school diploma, but not a four-year degree. And we focus on that because those jobs are actually the largest segment of the U.S. economy. And we know that adult education is an absolutely critical piece of the puzzle in helping people to build their skills and access middle skill training and middle skill jobs that can allow them to earn family-sustaining wages. So we're so pleased that so many of you have joined the webinar today. We know that many of you are implementing adult education programs in the field. You are instructors, you are case managers, you are program directors, and many of you are advocates yourselves with policymakers and others for the importance of adult education. So it might sound simple and obvious, but I did want to just briefly go over why advocacy is important, right? Policymakers hear a lot from K-12 education advocates and from higher education advocates. They need to hear from adult education, right? They may have outdated ideas of what adult education does or who it serves. And it's important that we as adult educators be able to carry that message. But as you'll hear in today's webinar, sometimes the most powerful messengers are not the teachers and instructors, but are actually adult learners themselves. And I want to emphasize that it's not always about passing new legislation, right? Sometimes it's really about educating policymakers about your issue so that they can think about it differently, not only as they're in budget discussions or passing new legislation, but frankly in discussions with governor's offices and state departments of education, and other stakeholders for whom understanding the role that English language classes and high school equivalency classes play in helping people access good jobs and good opportunities for themselves and their families is so, so important. So we can't assume that folks in the policymaking arena know what we do or why it's important. And that's why I'm so pleased that so many of you have joined us today. The National Skills Coalition has a series of resources that support the work that many of you are doing at the state level to try to advance good policy. Our 50 state scans show where your state stands on different policies. We have a half dozen or so, including integrated education and training, which you see here on this slide. And then we have policy toolkits. And the toolkits show examples from 3 or 4 states that have good policies in place. And they also include sample language that you can use in your state if you're trying to advance a policy. And if you're looking at this map and thinking, my state isn't colored blue, and I know we have some work done on integrated education and training, I will say our state scans are for states that have a statewide policy that goes above and beyond what the federal government requires. And I'm happy to chat more about this in the Q&A or offline after today's webinar if you have questions. NSC also does a lot of federal level advocacy. We released a set of 8 policy proposals last November, just after the election, that was really a bipartisan skills agenda developed with the input of many of you in the field for the new president. And of course, at the time we were developing the agenda, we did not know who that president would be. And one of the key elements of that was really something that we heard loud and clear from so many of you in the field, which is so many adult learners need additional supportive services to be able to enter into and succeed in career pathways. They need childcare, they need transportation. And so a key part of our recommendations is this idea of a career pathways fund. And we're proposing that Congress do that under the Higher Education Act when that is reauthorized. Many of you know that HEA is the piece of legislation that oversees the Pell Grant. But our recommendation around a career pathway support fund really urges community colleges and other higher education institutions to partner with community-based organizations on the ground that are experienced in being able to provide career navigation services and pathway counseling and guidance for adult learners, as well as access to those child care and transportation funds. This is a policy proposal that is a really big picture, ambitious ask. We don't expect that Congress is about to enact it. We very much do expect that part of getting Congress to understand why this is important is the voices of people like you in the field who can explain why it's so crucial that adult learners have access to these services to help them succeed, not just in GED classes or high school equivalency, not just in English language classes, but as they continue to progress along the education and career ladder. So that's a quick example of some of the ways that National Skills Coalition is engaging. We hope that many of you on this webinar are already engaged with us, but we'd like to specifically invite you to engage as part of a constituent call with a congressperson to share your perspective and what's happening in your community, and to join us for our Skills Summit in February of 2018. I've put some links on the slides here, but we'd love to hear from you in email after the webinar if this is something that interests you and you'd like to dig deeper. So I'd like to share a few resources here, and then we'll turn to our panel and our guests. So National Skills Coalition has published a series of publications which are all available on our website, and we are delighted when we hear that many of you are using these publications when you meet with your mayor, when you meet with your city council member, when you meet with newspaper editors or members of the media, to really help them understand why the work that you're doing is so important for the goals that they have. Almost every elected official says they're interested in jobs and economic development. Understanding that adult education is a key foundation for that is part of the 2-page fact sheet that we have illustrated on this slide here. And we also did a report last year, or earlier this year rather, which may be something that you're already familiar with, but if not, it highlights the importance of adult education, literacy and numeracy in particular, in folks who are working in the service sector, so retail, hospitality, and entry-level healthcare jobs. And I just tucked in a couple of charts and graphs from this report, not because you need to jot down this information right this moment, but because we warmly encourage you to use these slides and these graphics in your own publications and reports. And we're happy to send you the image files if you'd like to drop this into a PowerPoint that you're doing or add it to a fact sheet to really help the folks that you're talking to understand how your high school equivalency class or your English language class fits into the bigger picture of economic and workforce development in your community. So these are just a couple of examples. We have about 8 or 10 of these charts that are available if you're interested, as well as the longer report. There's a couple of additional resources from some of our partner organizations that I wanted to make sure that you had a link for. We're going to hear a lot from our panelists, so I'm not going to go into great detail about some of the why to engage in these activities, but if you're an adult educator and you want to provide your learners with an opportunity to do some writing about how adult education helps them, the publication The Change Agent, which is published by World Education in Boston, is a wonderful opportunity for adult learners to submit their writing and have it published. And there's a series of really terrific slides and a webinar recording from the Networks for Integrating New Americans initiative about other ways that adult learners can get engaged in civic involvement through field trips, through informal storytelling, and other means. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our partner organization, COAID, the Coalition on Adult Basic Education. Many of you are COAID members and have attended their conferences. COAID has a student ambassador program. They have a number of training resources. They will be offering some webinars in the months to come. They'll have a student strand at their national conference in Phoenix next spring. They're planning to hold a student congress. And they ask that you submit your student success stories to their campaign at Educate and Elevate. So I wanted to make sure to share that information from our partners at COAID. So we're going to turn now to our conversation, and I'd like to introduce you first to Diane Jackson, who works at the Queen Creek Family Resource Center and is also the president-elect of the Arizona Association for Lifelong Learning, which is the statewide adult education organization in Phoenix, in Arizona rather. Diane is based outside Phoenix. Diane has spent most of her 44 years in education working with adult learners. She has trained nonprofit leaders in advocacy in the U.S., Nicaragua, and Pakistan. She has been with the Queen Creek Adult Ed program for the last 13 years. And as mentioned, she is the president-elect of AALL, the statewide adult education organization in Arizona. So Diane, welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining. And can you start by giving our listeners a little bit of context about your organization? How long has the Queen Creek Family Resource Center been operating and so forth?
Well, thank you, Amanda, and we are so happy to be here to share some of our experiences working with students as part of our overall advocacy program. Queen Creek Adult Education Program is housed within the Queen Creek Unified School District, located in a small town about 45 miles southeast of Phoenix, Arizona. We serve about 7 different communities that straddle 2 counties, Maricopa County and Pinal County, and those 2 counties couldn't be more different, more distinctive in terms of economic development, population, and so on. The Family Resource Center has been operating within the school district since 1995. In addition to the adult ed program, it also houses the migrant program, and it serves as a resource and referral center for families in the community, which includes a food bank, referrals to health, financial assistance, utility assistance, all of those kinds of things for families that may be in need or in crisis. The adult ed program started in 1996 We serve over 300 students in day and evening classes. Those classes include HSE/GED and all levels of ELA.
Great. Well, thank you for giving us that little thumbnail sketch. I think it's helpful for folks to sort of situate. I know we have people joining today's webinar who are part of nonprofit organizations themselves, who are part of community colleges, and others who are working within school districts as you are. Now, one of the reasons we wanted to have you and the student ambassadors on the webinar today was that you're working in what a lot of folks would consider a pretty challenging climate for state policy. Among other issues, several years ago, the state legislature passed SB 1070, which makes Arizona one of only a handful of states that restricts access to WIOA Title II adult education services by immigration status. Why do you think it's important to engage with state policymakers, even if they may be skeptical about your work?
Well, we have to engage with them. There really isn't any other option. They are the ones who make the determination about funding, about issues concerning who we may serve. What we have learned to do is to be very strategic in the way we approach them and who we initially approach. Despite SB 1070, I would have to say, for example, that former Governor Jan Brewer did include adult education in her last budget. So that, I think, was in part because of really, really strong advocacy effort on our part, including taking student ambassadors to meet with the governor's aide, the then governor's aide for education, who, as it turned out, happened to have taught ESL to adults in Europe. So we were able to make a connection there. We are, as I said, extremely strategic about how we approach policymakers and legislators. And we have to say that even in this kind of critically and challenging environment, we have created not only some allies, but also a few very important champions in the state legislature.
That's great, and I know folks are going to be very eager to ask questions about that, and there's an awful lot of folks on today's webinar who are working in climates where they may also be dealing with some policymakers who are skeptical or sometimes even hostile to some of the issues that we're trying to advance. So I'm glad that you're here to share. So I want to pull back the lens for just a minute and talk about why the Student Ambassador Program was launched. Many of the folks listening to today's webinar are accustomed to engaging with policymakers themselves, but they may not have done advocacy side by side with adult learners. So can you tell us a little bit about who created the Student Ambassador Program and how you have approached it?
The Student Ambassador Program here in Arizona was created by Regina Sewitt, who is a Vice President at Pima Community College located in Tucson, Arizona. And Regina is currently serving as the committee chair for a student engagement committee within COAID. She recognized that we really needed to have the customers who can really testify to the value of adult education side by side with teachers and administrators and program directors. We've taken this program a bit farther in Queen Creek in that it is part of our ABE course. And also we do it with the advanced level. So I meet with students over the course of an entire year, and adjusted for their skill level, we really start developing ambassadors who are extremely well trained. They act as trainers for part of our statewide ambassador training sponsored by the Arizona Association for Lifelong Learning. And I think that probably we are one of the most active student programs in the state of Arizona, simply because we recognize that these are the people that policymakers need to hear from. And we have discovered these are the people that policymakers want to hear from.
That's great. And we are huge fans of Regina here at National Skills Coalition. She sits on our national advisory panel on skills equity. She's come to our Skills Summit. So always glad to hear Regina and Pima Community College get a shout out. So I'd like to turn now to the student ambassadors. You have 4 student ambassadors with you today, Diane, and I'll introduce them briefly here, and then we're going to hear from each of them individually. So the student ambassadors are Maybelin Rodriguez, Maria Alvidrez, Martha Bomann, and Ana Morin. And you see them pictured here on this slide. We're going to hear first from Maybelin Rodriguez, who has been a student ambassador for 4 years. She is the 2016 Arizona Association for Lifelong Learning Student of the Year and was a runner-up for the COABE 2017 Learner of the Year. Maybelin was a communications specialist in her home country. So Maybelin, what did you think when you were asked to become a student ambassador? Was it something that was exciting to you? Was it a little nerve-wracking? What did you think?
Good morning. It is a pleasure to me to be here and share my experience in adult education. Well, with respect to the question, in my case, I was very excited, but at the same time, I was nervous because I was excited to learn something new, but you know, I was nervous because I had a lot of fears. When I started classes, I felt very lost. I thought that I was in a wrong place because my English was limited. And I decided to talk with Mrs. Jackson, and I said, teacher, I think that I can't continue in this class. I can't speak like my classmates because they just speak very clear and fluid, and I can't. And I think I'm not ready to do that. And I will never forget the word that did say, because she said, well, don't worry about that. That's why you are here, because you need to learn. And this is a process. And you don't need to compare with others. And of course you can do it. And you need to try it. Never give up. Well, I decided to listen to her, and now I'm here. And now I am a proud student ambassador, even my fears and my nerves.
That's wonderful. And I love that story about how everything is a learning process, because that is certainly true. So we're going to turn now to Martha Bomann. Martha has been an ambassador for 1 year. She came to the U.S. from Germany and had previously been a member of the board of the country's largest nursing home chain. Martha, can you tell us about what your goal was in becoming a student ambassador?
Yes, my goal was, and still it is, to improve my English skills, to make an effort to speak to public, to be encouraged to speak on the phone, and to support the adult education program, to make state officials aware how important adult education programs like ours here in Queen Creek for the community and society in general are. Since I came to the United States 3 years ago, I realized that I have to work a lot on my English language. But fortunately, to be an ambassador for such an important program, which has a positive impact for the society, is a good chance for me to continue my training. I'm happy to get the chance to take English classes at the adult education program and to work together with Diane and the other ambassadors.
Yeah, I like how both of you have already mentioned how important it is to be also working with other student ambassadors in addition to working with Diane. So I think that's another important point. I'd like to bring Maria into the conversation now. Maria has been a student ambassador for 2 years. She was one of 2 Arizona students selected to attend the COABE 2017 conference in Atlanta. She just returned from a co-aid-sponsored trip for Capitol Hill Day, a day of adult education advocacy in Washington, D.C. So she hasn't just done advocacy in Arizona, she's actually come here to Washington to do federal advocacy. Maria, can you tell us, how did you practice before you went to talk to officials for the first time?
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here today. Well, when we knew who we are going to meet, we did a little research about for this person to know more about them. For example, if he or she was in a favor of education, and what will be our advantage or disadvantage, and we're able to go more prepared. I learned visually, so I made my notes. I practice in different ways. I read them several times and try to memorize the most important. I even underlined keywords to remind me easier what I had to say. When I went the first time, I went with many students who had already had opportunity to go to Congress, and they made me feel more calm because they shared their experiences with us so we could know what to expect. And one of the things that works best is to practice with our classmates, practice from how to arrive and greet the receptionist, to the order how to enter the office, who speaks first, who made the first question, etc. One of the students even played a role as he or she were the Congress member. I like to record my voice on my cell phone, read my notes, and listen several times before the practice to make me feel more comfortable. Thanks to the great experience of Ms. Jackson planning the visit to the Congress, we can practice in different scenarios. My participation my first time was small since we were several colleagues, but we all had a part. But it was a great experience because I never imagined that I would have the opportunity to meet with people so important in politics.
That's great. And I love the story about how you didn't just practice what you were going to say in the meeting, but you also practiced how you were going to greet the receptionist and who was going to speak first. I know many of us have been on visits where there are 4 or 5 different people crowding into a small space, and I think we can all imagine what that was like. So Diane, I'd like to come back to you for a second. Sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming to folks to figure out who they should even try to meet with at the state level. So can you talk a little bit about how you chose which state officials you were going to try to meet with and what your process was for selecting them?
The ambassadors are really very involved in the selection process. Actually, this becomes a class project. We bring in the laptop. We have surveyed every student in our program to find out what their zip codes are so that we can look up who the representatives are and kind of tally which ones which representatives represent the majority of our students. We then take a look at everything, voting records, the committees that the representatives may serve on. We also take a look and see if there are any personal connections with our students, or particularly our student ambassadors and those representatives, because at the state level, it's like a big small town. Somebody always knows somebody. And so we've had cases where our student ambassadors may actually go to church with a particular representative or shop in a store that the representative's family owns. And so we figure out ways that we can use those kinds of connections, those natural connections, of course, to our advantage. One of the big things, of course, in doing all of this was a way to be more proactive. We used to have a tendency to wait until funding was in danger, and then we launched some kind of campaign where students would send out postcards and write letters and, send emails from their home computers, of course. But this was a way to respond before, to continuously educate those legislators and policymakers. So once we've identified the likely targets, if you will, we set about looking again at the ways in which we might connect with them, how strong their commitment is to education. We tailor the approach for every single meeting. We also establish relationships with secretaries. That's very, very important because they're the gatekeepers very often. Or at the national level, certainly aides. We try to find out who the education aide is or the policy director for education, and to establish, again, that relationship, which can help us to make sure that our emails are read, that our calls are answered, and it makes it easier for us to set up meetings. So nothing is left to chance in terms of who we target. As I mentioned earlier, there are some policymakers and legislators we've decided that, maybe they're going to have to wait until down the road. We kind of look for, if you will, as much low-hanging fruit as we can possibly find.
That's great, and I love how purposeful each step that you just described is. Coming from the state of Pennsylvania myself, I also know what it's like. We joke that it's not 6 degrees of separation, it's 1.5 degrees of separation. Yes, and absolutely. I can imagine a lot of folks can identify with the idea that, you might not know your state rep personally, but as you said, maybe you attend worship services with them, or maybe shop in a store that their family owns, or that sort of thing. So we have a couple more questions that I'm going to share with the student ambassadors, but then I will open it up for listeners on today's webinar to ask your own questions. So I'm going to encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to please go ahead and start submitting your questions in the Q&A box. I know that Diane and the student ambassadors are eager to answer your questions and share more of their story. So we're going to turn now to Ana Morin. Ana has been a student ambassador for 6 years. She runs the student store. The store's profits go to support scholarships for students who cannot afford the fees for the GED exam. And appropriately enough, given that she's running the store, she is an accountant. So Ana, can you tell us what it was like when you met with state officials? Did anything surprise you about the meeting?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Well, let me answer your question with a short picture of my first experience. And it was my first experience visiting an official meeting in a representative of Arizona. Initially, it was really nervous. I have to let you know, all the students, that there's no an easy activity, but later then it changed. The simple idea intimidated me, but once that one of the representatives come in person and welcome us and guide us to the conference room, was give us kind of relaxed. But I have to mention that that day we bring with a group of classmates, future ambassadors at that moment, that I have to tell you, not only believe in our cause, but also to whom we want role models. For those reasons, you can imagine the responsibility and the nerve. But through the meeting, we follow a protocol that start with introduce ourselves, the purpose of the meeting, sharing 1 or 2 personal stories. That is a really important point. A couple of questions, etc. The tension goes down, and after the representatives start talking, and we notice that even though they are in a high political position, they are just person like us. Then it's nothing that we need to be afraid, Nevertheless, something was rounding my mind since we start planning the visit, because it was my first visit, and it was the main idea of the meeting. And the main idea is educate them. It sounds crazy to me and to everybody that heard that, I think so, because I personally assume that in order to take decisions about adult education, in this case specific, they should know about it. But my surprise or my liking was that, because they didn't. We can notice at the moment that they heard the data about the statistic and the economic impact that we represent as adult education community. And I saw their faces. I remember it was really surprised. I read the word in their faces, really, asking themselves. And it was one of the most likely things, and the other was through the sharing our stories, they changed. I can imagine that I can saw that they changed the perspective they have of the people who take advantage of this kind of program. They think that most of these programs are only for illiterate people or farm workers, migrants that only want to live under the system because most of them, they have that idea, wrong idea, I have to say. But one that they heard statistic about how many migrants are high-level educated, whom only lack of a second language instruction to incorporate into the workforce and contribute to the economical system, they are came out. That was one of the most likely things that I noticed because I think this is the purpose, exactly the purpose of the meeting, to educate them, to they know from us what is the real person that are using these resources. Thank you.
Ana, thank you so much. I love so many things that you just said. I especially appreciate the fact that, yes, elected officials may seem kind of high and distant from you, but when you interact with them, you realize they're just people like you, and yet they're also people who can be surprised, who might have made assumptions about who they think is benefiting from adult education programs, and they can be awakened by your stories to learn more about the range of adult learners and the backgrounds that adult learners bring that go beyond just whether they do or don't have second language skills. So thank you for sharing that. Martha, I want to come back to you because many of the people listening to today's webinar are teachers or program directors like Diane. What advice would you give to teachers who want to help their students prepare to be student ambassadors like you?
Oh, it isn't easy to give advice to teachers, but I would say, and this was my experience with Diane, that it was motivating for me that Diane believed in me and my abilities to take the training to be an ambassador. I never had the feeling that she pushed me in a direction I didn't want. She gave me the reassurance that I'm the right person on the right program. Sometimes I feel lost, especially when I had to speak in front of people, and the right vocabulary wouldn't come in my mind. She was in the background only to give the feeling, I'm here if you want me, if you would need me. A few weeks ago, I held a speech at the school board meeting here in Queen Creek for approximately 15 minutes as an ambassador for the adult education program. And I was told everybody could understand my English and Diane was not needed to help me out. It was like a jump in cold water with a soft push from Diane. Always when I had technical questions or I needed details, she was helpful and supported me. In my case, it was the push and the motivation and confidence that I can be an ambassador. I would conclude that to prepare students to become an ambassador, the teacher should show the right motivation and give explanation to make clear what it means to be an ambassador. The teacher should give the needed background information and to be there for questions and support.
Great. Yes, I think many of us can identify with that role of the adult educator like Diane, doing two things at once. One is pushing you in the cold water, and the other is providing you with the support so that you can swim when you get there. So I'd like to go finally back to Maria and talk about, Maria, what advice would you give to other students who would like to become a student ambassador?
Well, I would like to share a little bit of my story so they can understand a little bit what if I can, everybody can. I started this program in August 2015 after a diagnostic and treatment of cancer. I was offered the side effects of the chemotherapy, such as hair loss and confusion in my brain, better known as a chemo brain. My hair was already growing, but the confusion on my mind was something I had problems with every day. I was afraid to participate in some activities, and that when someone asked me something related, I could not remember. It stopped me a lot of times, but thanks to the ambassador class, I was able to overcome this fear. The first advice I want to give is that please do not think that they are in the wrong class when they heard that they are going to Congress to advocate for their program. The ambassador class will prepare them to know how to talk to people in important positions, but they will also learn that they, as voters, have power with their votes and are very, very important for all politicians. In this class, you will not only learn how to speak in front of your class, but also learn to feel more secure in different parts of your daily life. Like an example, in a conference at your child's school or in a job interview. For me, this class was helped me a lot in many different areas. A very important one has helped me overcome my fear of forgetting something important due to the side effect of the chemo. I was always afraid to participate in class, and that the teacher will ask me a question and not remember the answer or not know how to answer. Today, I no longer have that fear. I have more confidence in myself. I can participate in more activities. And if I forget something, I simply improvise. I just want to improve my English skills, so when I get medical clear for my doctor, I will have more and new skills for my new job. My goal is to continue with my education and one day to become an occupational therapist. So I really, really recommend to all the teachers to encourage their students to take this class because this class will change their lives.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I think a lot of people, even if they haven't faced the exact kind of health crisis that you faced, can identify with the idea that you might feel intimidated or overwhelmed and that you might be able to build confidence by participating in a project like this. So we have a whole bunch of questions. We have 5 questions that have come in so far and some others I think that are still in progress. So I'd like to go first to Diane. And the question is, how is the Student Ambassador Program funded?
Well, I know that's probably a big question mark for administrators, directors, and instructors who may be listening to us today. And in our case, we have some really creative leadership. As I mentioned, this is one of my classes. So it wasn't necessary to go and look for an instructor to be able to do this. It really didn't cost anything extra out of our budget. There are also other ways to start building and developing student leaders and student ambassadors. State associations may find that they would like to support statewide ambassador training or even regional ambassador trainings if the states are highly populated and very large. The Arizona Association for Lifelong Learning each year sponsors a statewide training using our organization's funds, and we bring in students, directors, instructors from all over the state of Arizona who apply and train them to be trainers. It's a day-and-a-half training, so again, it's not hugely expensive. We have donated facilities, state-of-the-art. Queen Creek lets us use, as the host, lets us use a fabulous training conference room that we have here. And the association underwrites the cost of food, materials, transportation, which is driving in the case of Arizona, and also lodging for students that are more than 50 miles away from the Queen Creek area. So this is another way to start to build it at a very low cost way. I'd also like to mention, Amanda, that at COAID, one of the pre-conference sessions is going to be a quick and dirty, if you will, ambassador training. And what we're hoping to see is that teams of folks will come in. The team might include one director, one administrator, and one student. And we can train those folks at the pre-conference session as trainers, so they can go back to their states, to their locations, and again, create and build an army of student ambassadors.
Great. Well, I know there's a lot of folks who are excited to hear about what you've managed to do. And I want to lift up one thing that you said, which I think is really important, which is you were able to build this in as a leadership development and English language and other skill development activity within classes that you're already offering. And I know some folks may have questions about the difference between lobbying and other kinds of advocacy. Obviously, a lot of the outreach that you're doing is really just educating legislators about an issue. And that doesn't fall under the category of lobbying. So if folks are concerned that your funding streams may not permit you to do lobbying, there's a lot of this work that is not lobbying. One other thing I wanted to lift up is, I think you mentioned the role of the state level organization. Can you talk a bit about how they have supported? Do they help with transportation costs and getting the student ambassadors to and from the meetings? How do they support?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. Yes, as part of the association's awareness committee budget, programs within the state can apply for funding. If you need a bus, for example, to transfer your student ambassadors from your location to the state capitol, that is something that the State Association Awareness Committee can support, in addition to, obviously, the training. The State Association can help you to find materials that are appropriate for your leave behind. All of those kinds of things are possible with support from the State Association.
Great, thank you. So I have a question now for the students. There's several different audience members who are wondering about variations on this question, which is they're wondering how you got recruited to be a student ambassador. In other words, were you, did people reach out to you and invite you? And I think what they're really asking is, what if students feel afraid or intimidated about being a student ambassador? So for any of the 4 students, if you'd like to talk about your answer to this question, I know folks would be very interested. How can you get more students to be interested in being student ambassadors?
Well, I think this kind of classes giving us more security, more self-esteem, and we can to explain to other students that they can do it, even the fears, even the accent, even the pronunciation, because everybody can do it. Obviously, the fears are present in the beginning, but we like a student, we can invite others and show like others our stories and say we had the same fears, we had the same experience, but you can do it. You wanna have the tools, the techniques, and you need to believe in yourself, because of course you can do it. It is the message. Everybody can do it.
I would like to ask Amanda that as ambassador for a couple of years, as I mentioned in my answer, we became as a role model of the other students, and the other students noticed some advance or some better develop of the language in us. And they ask, some of the time they ask, how can I do it if they are not in the correct level where it's impacted the whole year, the program, the ambassador. And then we try to canalize them to get the right way to do it. But as Maybelin mentioned, we all the time are promoting with all our program that they can become ambassadors, because it's really important to support our program. Thanks to our program, we are learning. That's why we need to give a little bit back.
That's great, and I love that testimonial about the importance of giving back. Diane, one question that we see coming in from a couple of folks is around how to address it if students feel that it's administrators' responsibility to do advocacy and make sure that there's funding for programs, how to get the students to feel like this is also part of their role and their responsibility. We've just heard some great stories from the ambassadors about the power of peer examples. I'm wondering if you have anything else you want to share from a program director standpoint about using the pedagogical framework of your classes to help communicate to learners that this is their role too.
I think what we've seen is we've created this kind of buzz around the ambassador training, and students who might be a little bit laid back about it, well, it's not my issue, it's really, it's the staff's issue, begin to see that our students are meeting with really important people. Their stories are ending up in local newspapers. They are having a chance to travel. They do also see the improvement in confidence, in language skills, in presentation skills, and it seems to be having some effect. The other thing is that we do realize that we have to educate other students as well, and so we try to share the kind of information aimed at a different market that we share with policymakers and legislators. We once met with a legislator who told us that he didn't know anything about adult ed before our meeting, but that in the future, when it came up for funding, he was going to see the faces of our students. And that kind of drives home the point about how important it is for all of the students, to the best of their ability, to participate in advocating for the program. I will also say that I've been with the program for 13 years, and I really haven't seen a lot of resistance. Once you get students excited, once they realize, you educate them in the same way about the importance of their role in keeping the program going, and they start to see results in their own lives, they're usually really anxious to be a part of this kind of program and training and advocacy.
That's great. So one slightly related question, somebody is curious whether the most of the ambassadors are English language students, or whether they're also US-born students or students who already have strong English skills. And I think part of what they're asking is, ESL students may be with the program longer, and so they have time to participate in an ambassador program. Are there also non-ESL students who participate in the ambassador program?
Yes, you see a strong ESL program, a strong ESL participation in our program, because that happens to be our population. And as you said, the HSE or GED students tend to rotate in and out a bit more quickly. However, at the community college level here in Arizona, at Pima Community College, for example, there are a lot of students who are native-born, native English speakers, who are also very, very much involved in the ambassador program.
Great, thank you for that question. I've got one more question for you all here, and I want to give the audience just a minute more if they want to get in any last questions before we close. But one question is, are you using the National Adult Education Honor Society to promote leadership or identify potential ambassadors? the National Adult Education Honor Society. Is that something that's being used at Queen Creek, Diane?
It is not, but as we speak, we've been, our Director of Instruction, Miguel Garcia, and I have been plotting and planning and even opening up the PO, the money channel, to be able to establish a National Honor Society chapter at Queen Creek. And I think it's a fantastic idea, a natural fit for perhaps recruiting, establishing an ambassador program in an adult ed program that already has an active National Honor Society chapter.
Great. Well, we got that question from Ann Sargent, who is the president-elect of the Maine Adult Education Association, and sounds like she's really excited about this idea in her state as she comes on board there next year. So we are just about ready to wrap up here. I want to give each of you a moment to add any last thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and close out. So Diane, do you or any of the student ambassadors have anything else you would like to add?
I see a little bit of panic and some head shaking. That was not a question. But I want to say to the ambassadors who participated today, just on a personal note, that I'm so proud of their participation. This is the first time I think any of them have actually done a webinar, and it's really exciting to be part of a national webinar. We're so excited about what we do and how we do it, and so eager to share. And we're also eager to learn. So if anybody else out there who's listening has elements that they find successful, please share with us, because we're always looking for new ways to do these things.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We are getting some really nice thanks from the audience telling you that the ambassadors are really inspiring, that they thank you for your service. So I want to close out just by saying the names of the ambassadors one more time, just so that folks know who we were hearing from today. We were hearing from Maybelin Rodriguez, Maria Alvidrez, Martha Bomann, and Ana Morin, as well as Diane Jackson of the Queen Creek Family Resource Center just outside Phoenix, Arizona. This is Amanda Berkson-Chilcock. I thank all of you for taking the time to join us on today's webinar. You will be receiving the webinar recording and slides tomorrow. You have links to all the resources that we talked about. You'll be able to contact us if you have follow-up questions. We thank you very much for your time and your willingness to be with us in this new webinar exploration of the role of adult learners in advocacy. And Diane, thank you, and thanks to all of the student ambassadors.
Thank you,
have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Amanda.